For as long as I can remember, I have dreamed of having a real family. I grew up in an orphanage, surrounded by other children who, like me, had nowhere to go. But unlike me, many of them were adopted. I would always sit by the window, watching couples come and go, choosing their children as if they were picking up a special gift. I waited anxiously for the day when someone would look at me and say, "You are the daughter we always dreamed of." But that day never came. The years passed, and I grew up. I learned to fend for myself, to expect nothing from anyone. When I turned 18, I was told that my time at the orphanage was over. "Now you have to move on with your life," they said. But how could I move on if I never had a home to go back to? With no other choice, I got a job in a small factory. The work was exhausting, but they paid me a modest wage, enough to rent a small room and live on. I spent my days wondering what it would be like to grow up in a normal family, to have parents who cared about me, siblings to share my secrets with. All I wanted was to feel the warmth of a home. Instead, my reality was a cramped, lonely room. The only thing that kept me going was my dream of building the family I never had. I worked hard, saved every penny, and made plans for the future. One day, I'll meet someone special, get married, and have a house full of love, I thought. That dream was what kept me going. It was during that time that I met Lucas. He appeared like a ray of sunshine in my gray life. He worked in the company's office and always greeted me with a warm smile. He seemed different from the others. While everyone else saw me as just another employee, Lucas treated me with affection and respect. "You have a special glow," he once said, and those words stuck in my mind. No one had ever complimented me like that. No one had ever looked at me with such interest. And for the first time, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't so alone in the world. We got closer quickly. Within a few months, we were dating, and before I knew it, I was in love. Lucas was everything I had ever wanted, attentive, kind, and made me feel special. He promised me a happy life with him, a home full of love, just like I had dreamed of. 6 months later, we got married. On our wedding day, as I walked down the aisle, I couldn't hold back the tears. Finally, I had found what I had been looking for. Now, I had a husband, a family, a place to call my own. What I didn't know was that that dream would soon turn into a nightmare. On our wedding day, tears streamed down my face without me being able to control them. I was so emotional. Finally, I had a family. Finally, I was no longer alone. Lucas held my hand tightly, as if to reassure me. "If you keep crying like that, you'll ruin your makeup," he whispered, smiling. I laughed through my tears, feeling like the luckiest woman in the world. The party was simple, but full of joy. Even though there weren't many guests, I was happy to have someone by my side who promised to take care of me. I didn't need luxury. I didn't need a big celebration. I just wanted a home. That night, I fell asleep next to Lucas, feeling my heart overflow with gratitude. In the first months of marriage, everything seemed perfect. Lucas was loving, attentive, and did everything he could to make me smile. I dedicated myself to taking care of the house and our small apartment. Since I've always been independent, I continued working and contributing to the expenses. I never questioned who earned more or less, because for me the most important thing was harmony between us. But little by little, something started to bother me. Whenever Lucas went to visit his mother, he came back strange, more distant. And that's when I started to notice what seemed to be a problem. My mother-in-law never liked me. From the beginning, I noticed that she looked at me coldly. She analyzed me from top to bottom and always seemed to look for a flaw to criticize. "You should dress better," she said in a sharp tone. "A married woman has to know how to take care of her appearance." At first, I tried not to take it personally. After all, she was my mother-in-law, and I wanted to get along with her. But I soon realized that she didn't just want to give advice. She wanted control. One day, while I was washing the dishes, I overheard Lucas on the phone with her. "Mom, I already told you I'm taking care of this," he said impatiently. I was curious, but I didn't want to seem intrusive. Later, when I asked him what it was about, he changed the subject. "My mom's stuff, nothing major." That puzzled me. What was he hiding? As time went by, Lucas began to change. If before he was affectionate, now he always seemed tired and irritable. Work is consuming me, he said. But I felt there was something more. The confirmation came a few months later. One night, when I was reviewing our expenses, I noticed that the money Lucas was bringing home was getting smaller and smaller. The bills were starting to get tight. Since I also worked, I covered some expenses, but it didn't make sense. So I decided to ask, Lucas, where is your salary going? He hesitated for a moment before letting out an impatient sigh. I'm helping my mother. She needs it. I was silent for a moment, trying to understand. Okay, honey, but we need to have a balance. We have our bills to pay. How much are you giving her? Lucas looked away. And that's when I realized the situation was worse than I imagined. My entire salary? My heart stopped for a second. What? You're giving your mother your entire salary? And what about us? How are we going to pay our bills? He got angry. You're exaggerating. My mother has always taken care of me. The least I can do is help her. But what about us? Our house? Our life? He gave me a cold look. You work, don't you? Then we can live off what you earn. That sentence fell like a bomb on me. The man who promised to take care of me was now throwing all the responsibility on me. And, even worse, he didn't seem to have a problem with it. I didn't know it yet, but this was just the first of many humiliations I would face. That night, I barely slept. Lucas's words echoed in my mind. You work, don't you? Then we can live off what you earn. How could he say something like that so coldly? I got married thinking we would be a team, that we would share the responsibilities. But at that moment, I realized I was alone. The next day, I decided to have a serious talk with him. I waited until he got home from work and tried to stay calm. Lucas, we need to talk. He huffed, throwing his backpack on the couch. This again? I already told you my mother needs the money. I took a deep breath. I'm not telling you to stop helping her. But we have our bills, our plans. Do you think it's fair that I'm the only one paying for everything? Lucas looked at me impatiently and then said something I'll never forget. If you weren't so selfish, you'd understand that my mother has always been by my side. You just showed up now, and you want more importance than her. My heart sank. Was that what he thought of me? That I was competing with his own mother? At that moment, I realized that I hadn't just married Lucas. I had married his mother too. Days went by, and the situation only got worse. With each paycheck I received, I saw Lucas handing everything over to his mother, without question. And, as if that weren't enough, she started to want to control my money too. One day, my mother-in-law showed up at home unannounced, as she often did. She came in, looked around, and started criticizing everything. You're spending too much. Look at all the food in the fridge. That's a waste. It's not a waste. I only bought groceries for the week. She crossed her arms and looked down at me. If I had been raised with discipline, I would know how to manage it better. But since you didn't have a mother to teach you, that hurt more than any slap. She knew my story. She knew that I grew up without parents. And yet she used that against me? From that day on, my mother-in-law even controlled what I bought. If I came home with bags from the supermarket, she would come and look at what was inside. Why did you buy meat? Do you think we're rich? Because we need to eat, don't Marta? Rice and beans are more than enough. Do you think you can live like a madam? Even though I was the one responsible for paying for the house, she made a point of humiliating me. And Lucas? He never defended me. But the last straw came when she decided that I no longer needed my own money. Since Lucas gives me all of his salary, you can do the same. I looked at her in disbelief. What? What do you mean? I work, I pay our bills, and now you want me to give you all my money too? She shrugged. If you love my son, you should make sacrifices for him. Family means sharing everything. Lucas, who was sitting on the couch, just nodded. She's right. My mother knows what's best for all of us. At that moment, I felt my stomach turn. That was it. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't a partner. I was just a means to support that family. I knew I had to do something. But what? I had nowhere to go. I had no family, no support. I was trapped in a marriage where I was being exploited by an absent husband and a domineering mother-in-law. But one thing I knew, it wouldn't stay like this forever. After that conversation, I realized that my mother-in-law saw no limits to what she could demand of me. She already controlled my husband's salary, and now she wanted to control mine too. But I knew that if I gave in, I would never have financial freedom again. In the days and the following years, I began to hide some of my money. I kept small amounts inside books, in the pockets of clothes I hardly ever wore, and even in the bottom of jars in the kitchen. I needed to have something for myself, even if it was just a little. But my mother-in-law was smart. One day, she showed up unexpectedly, as she always did, and entered our room without asking for permission. I was at work, and when I came back, I found my drawers rummaged through. "What happened here?" I asked, feeling my blood boil. Lucas, sitting on the couch, looked at me with disdain. My mother was just organizing things. Organizing? Or stealing what was mine? My mother-in-law came out of the kitchen and stared at me with a cynical expression. "Oh, so that's it? You were hiding money from us?" My heart raced. She had found my savings. "This money is mine. I worked for it." My voice came out louder than I intended. She laughed, shaking her head. "You live in my house, and you still want to hide money? What an ungrateful woman. In your house? I pay the bills here." Lucas stood up suddenly. "Shut up. You're lucky to have a roof over your head." Those words hit me like a knife. Was I lucky? I was paying for everything on my own, and yet he said I was lucky? That night, I cried in the shower. For the first time, I began to wonder if this marriage was really worth it. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. In the following days, I tried to make things right. I kept working, kept keeping the house in order, but my mother-in-law was increasingly abusive. If I bought food for the house, she complained that I was spending too much. If I bought less, she said I was a terrible housewife. I couldn't earn. But the worst was when she started to humiliate me in front of others. One time, Lucas invited some friends over for dinner. I made sure to prepare a nice meal, even though I was exhausted from work. While everyone was eating, my mother-in-law decided to attack me. "This food is good, but you could save a lot more if you knew how to manage your money better." The guests looked at each other, embarrassed. I felt my face burn with shame. "Mrs. Marta, I work all day and still take care of the house. The least I can do is offer a decent dinner." She smiled venomously. "And you still complain? From what my son told me, you're lucky he accepted you, since you don't even have a family." Silence fell over the table. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. She'd used my greatest pain against me, right in front of everyone. Lucas laughed. Yes, he laughed. "Mom, leave my wife alone. She already does what she can," he said, in a mocking tone, as if he wanted to demean me even more. That was too much for me. I couldn't stay there, being treated like a nobody. The next day, I made a decision. I would start saving money for real. I would leave that house. But before I could escape, something unexpected happened. That night, after the humiliating dinner, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I had to get out of there. I could no longer live under the control of my mother-in-law and the indifference of my husband. But how? I had no family, no place to go. I got up slowly so as not to wake Lucas and went to the kitchen. I grabbed a notebook and started writing down everything I needed to do to free myself. 1. Save money without anyone noticing. 2. Get a second job. 3. Find a place to stay when I got out. 4. Leave without anyone being able to stop me. I knew it wouldn't be easy. My mother-in-law was watching me all the time. But I also knew that staying there would mean completely losing my dignity. The next morning, I got up as if nothing had happened. I made coffee, cleaned the house, and went to work. But this time, I started looking for ways to earn extra money. And then I had an idea to work secretly at night. I started accepting small jobs. I did crafts, helped with spreadsheets, and even sewed clothes for neighbors. Every penny I earned went into a secret fund. I hid the money inside the lining of an old bag at the back of my closet. But my mother-in-law noticed something was different. "You're acting strange. Are you up to something?" She looked at me suspiciously as I tidied up the living room. I took a deep breath, keeping my cool. "I'm just focused on work. We need money, don't we?" She gave me a cold look. "Money? For what? You have a husband who supports the house." I almost laughed at the irony. I supported that house, but she would never admit it. The weeks went by, and little by little, my money grew. I already had enough to rent a small room and start my life from scratch. But just as I was about to leave, an unexpected event changed everything. One night, when I got home from work, I found Lucas on the couch, his head down. Something was wrong. "What happened?" I asked, feeling a chill down my spine. He looked up, visibly nervous. I lost my job. I was in shock. I should have felt sorry for him, but all I could think was, what's going to happen to me now? Before I could react, my mother-in-law came storming into the room. "This is your fault," she yelled, pointing her finger in my face. I blinked, not understanding. What? What do you mean my fault? If you were a decent wife, you would be supporting your husband instead of complaining and wasting money. I swallowed hard. She was distorting everything once again. Lucas buried his face in his hands. "Mom, please." But she continued. "What now? How are we going to pay the bills? I think it's time for you to stop working and hand over your salary to me." My heart raced. Did she want me to hand over everything now? That will never happen. My voice was firm. Her eyes widened in surprise. "What? You dare disobey me?" For the first time, I didn't lower my head. "I'm the only person here who's supporting this house, and you still want me to hand over everything? No. Enough." Lucas raised his head and looked at me angrily. "Are you choosing to fight with me and my mother at a time like this?" "No, Lucas," I said calmly. "I'm choosing to fight for myself." At that moment, I knew the war had begun, and I wasn't going to lose. After that argument, the tension in the house became unbearable. My mother-in-law gave me venomous looks every time she walked by. Lucas, who used to be affectionate, now barely spoke to me. I was no longer his wife. I was his enemy. I tried to go about my daily routine normally, but I knew something was about to happen. And I was right. One night, when I got home from work, I found the front door locked. I typed in the password for the electronic padlock, but nothing happened. They had changed the password. I knocked on the door, trying to stay calm. "Lucas, open the door." The silence on the other end was deafening. I could feel my heart pounding. I tried again. "Lucas, what's going on?" Then I heard footsteps. The door opened, and my mother-in-law appeared with a satisfied smile on her face. "You finally understand, right? We don't want you here anymore." I felt my body freeze. "What? Are you kicking me out of my own house?" "House?" She laughed. "This house belongs to my son. You only lived here because we accepted you. But since you don't want to help the family, there's no place for you anymore." My head spun. Were they really throwing me out? That's when Lucas appeared behind her, arms crossed. "It was my decision. You never really cared about our family. All you care about is money. You can go now." My eyes filled with tears. "Lucas, I've always been by your side. I've always paid our bills. How could you do this to me?" He shrugged. "You think you're independent, don't you? Then go live that independence far away from here." The door closed in my face. I stood there on the sidewalk, feeling reality hit me like a punch in the gut. I had nowhere to go. My purse was with me, but everything else had stayed inside the house. My clothes, my documents, my savings, everything. They had taken everything from me. Tears streamed down my face as I walked away, aimlessly. The street was dark and silent. The cold night wind blew against my skin, and the feeling of abandonment overwhelmed me. I was completely alone. I walked aimlessly for a while until I realized that I needed a plan. I couldn't stay on the street. I picked up my cell phone and called a coworker. Luckily, she answered. "Anna? I need a place to stay." Anna didn't hesitate. "Come here now." Hearing those words, my entire body relaxed. I still had a chance, and in that moment, I promised myself, this humiliation would be temporary. I would get back on my feet, and one day, Lucas and his mother would deeply regret having thrown me away as if I were worthless. Little did I know that this day would come much sooner than I imagined. That night, I slept at my colleague Anna's house. She was a true angel. She gave me clothes, a hot plate of food, and most importantly, she listened to me without judgment. "You need to pull yourself together. Don't let them destroy you." Her words gave me strength. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to rebuild my life. The next morning, I went straight to the company and asked for a salary advance. My boss, realizing my situation, agreed. With that money, I was able to rent a simple little room, but for the first time in a long time, it was all mine. With no one to humiliate me, with no one to control me. But something was still missing. I wanted to understand where I came from. All my life, I had accepted that I was an orphan, that I would never have a real family. But now, I felt that something inside me was screaming for answers. It was then that I remembered something that I had heard years ago: free DNA tests to find missing relatives. I did some research and found out that the police station in my city offered such a program. I didn't think twice. That same day, I went there and took the test. They collected my DNA and registered my information in the system. If there's a match, we'll contact you. I left there without much expectation. After all, I've never had much luck with these things. But fate had other plans for me. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. "Ma'am, we found a possible relative for you." My heart raced. What? What do you mean? The police officer took a deep breath. An elderly man filed a report a few months ago. He's been looking for the daughter he lost many years ago. I felt my legs grow weak. "Can you come to the police station? He wants to meet you." My head was spinning. Was this really real? After all the years of neglect and suffering, could I finally have a family? I needed to find out the truth. With my heart racing, I gathered up the courage and went to the police station. What I found there changed my life forever. My heart was beating so hard that I could feel the sound echoing in my ears as I walked to the police station. This couldn't be real. After so many years of feeling alone in the world, would I finally find my family? When I entered the indicated room, I saw an elderly man sitting with his hands trembling on his knees. His eyes were full of tears fixed on me, as if he could hardly believe what he was seeing. "Elizabeth?" His voice was choked, like a whisper full of emotion. My body froze. No one had ever called me that. Who are you?" My voice was weak, uncertain. He stood up slowly, and I saw the tears streaming down his face. "I'm your father. I've spent my whole life looking for you." The ground seemed to disappear beneath my feet. My vision blurred. I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask everything at once, but the words simply wouldn't come out. Did I have a father? The police officer intervened, explaining what had happened. My father had never abandoned me willingly. When I was still a baby, my paternal grandmother, obsessed with superstitions, took me secretly to an orphanage and told the family that I had disappeared. She lied. She said that if I stayed in the family, something terrible would happen. And everyone believed her. My father searched for me for years, but only discovered the truth recently, when his own mother, before dying, confessed what she had done. When I found out that you might be alive, I tried everything to find you. I never gave up hope. I felt a lump in my throat. I spent my whole life thinking that there was no one there. But I was wrong. And my mother? I asked, my voice trembling. My father lowered his head. "She got sick. Your disappearance destroyed her. But before she left, her last wish was to see you again." The tears I tried to hold back streamed down my face. "I don't believe this. You have brothers too." "Two." The shock was too great to process all at once. Brothers? Wasn't I alone in the world? My father approached me hesitantly, and then wrapped me in a strong hug, as if he wanted to make up for all the lost years. "You were never alone. We just didn't know where to find you." There, in my real father's arms, I felt a mixture of pain and relief. The pain of years of suffering. The relief of finally having found my true home. But one thing was certain: I still had some scores to settle. And soon, very soon, my mother-in-law and my ex-husband would bitterly regret everything they had done to me. That night was the first in years that I had slept peacefully. I was no longer alone. I spent the next few days getting to know my new family. My brothers were successful. One was a lawyer, the other a doctor. My father, now retired, had been an executive at a large company. I belonged to a family that never gave up on me. And then my father asked the question I feared most. "Elizabeth, where were you all this time? What was your life like?" I lowered my eyes. I didn't want him to know about the humiliations I had suffered. But my older brother sensed my hesitation. "Be honest. If someone hurt you, we want to know." I took a deep breath and told him everything. My marriage, the humiliations, the exploitation, how they robbed me and threw me out on the street. My father clenched his fists. "They treated you like this after everything you did for them?" I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. My lawyer brother crossed his arms and said coldly, "They will pay for this." And that was how, for the first time in my life, I had someone to fight for me. The next day, we got in the car and drove to my mother-in-law's house. Two black cars pulled up in front of the house. My heart was pounding. I rang the doorbell, and soon my mother-in-law appeared at the door. When she saw me, her face twisted in disgust. "What are you doing here? Have you come to beg for money?" Before I could answer, my father stepped forward. "We've come to pick up my grandchildren." Her eyes widened. "Who are you?" Lucas appeared shortly after, his expression confused. He looked me up and down, then back at my father. "Where did you find an old man to support you?" My brother gave a sarcastic laugh. "Don't worry. Money is no problem for our family." My mother-in-law frowned. "Family? What family? This woman has no one." My father looked her straight in the eye and said firmly, "You've spent years humiliating my daughter. But now, I'm the one in control. And you're going to pay for everything you've done." Lucas' face paled. "Is that a threat?" My brother, the lawyer, smiled coldly. "No, that's a promise." The tables had turned. My children ran out of the house and hugged me tightly. "Mommy, can we go with you?" I knelt down and held their faces, tears in my eyes. We will never be separated again. And then, under the shocked gazes of Lucas and his mother, I got into the car with my children and my real family. The sweetest revenge was my happiness away from them. As the car drove away from that house, I felt a huge weight lifted from my shoulders. I was free. Lucas and his mother watched us leave, but this time I was not the submissive and humiliated woman they so loved to control. Now I was in control. The next day, my lawyer brother started the lawsuit. We demanded child support, compensation for the years of abuse, and even reimbursement of the money my mother-in-law stole from me. At first, Lucas tried to act arrogant. "This will not achieve anything. Do you think you can destroy me?" But he did not count on one thing. My family was much more powerful than he imagined. The case was taken to court, and the evidence was overwhelming. Messages, testimonies from neighbors, financial records, everything showed the abuse I suffered for years. The judge had no doubts. Lucas was ordered to pay child support and return part of the money he took from me. In addition, my mother-in-law, who was so proud of having control over everything, had to sell her own house to pay off the debts she had accumulated. Now, the two of them were alone, with no money and no one to support them. And me? I was living the life I had always dreamed of. With the support of my family, I was able to start over. My children grew up surrounded by love, without fear or humiliation. I went back to school, and a few years later, I was able to open my own business. Now, I was truly independent. One day, a long time later, I received an unexpected call. It was Lucas. "Elizabeth, can we talk?" I laughed to myself. He finally realized what he had lost. "We have nothing more to talk about, Lucas." And I hung up. That was my true victory. Because the best revenge was not seeing him suffer. It was knowing that, without him, my life had become much better. And so, after so long, I was finally happy.